Welcome. Last time we looked at the No War, and now we'll be looking at what followed after that. Lesser known war, but one that really hurt humanity. The Gurubashi War. Indeed, a precursor war to the first one. Ever hired the Gurubashi workforce to carry your stuff? No, I can't say I have. Don't. They'll try to make blood voodoo or hoodoo out of your pet animals. Noted. Let's begin then. The Gurubashi War was a major conflict fought between the human kingdom of Stormwind and the coalition of Gurubashi jungle troll tribes in the south of the eastern kingdoms, primarily within the territories of the kingdom of Stormwind. Occurring around 18 years before the First War, the Gurubashi War saw a massive army of trolls lay siege to and nearly sack Stormwind City itself in response to the assassination of their previous warlord. The war was preceded by a long period of smaller conflicts between the two factions, largely over the territories bordering Stranglethorn Vale, that Stormwindian settlers began expanding into. Though initially isolated, the conflict quickly escalated out of control. Despite the best efforts of Stormwind's king, Baratheon Rin, the final provocation came when Prince Lane Rin personally led a small party to strike at the Gurubashi leadership in the central Stranglethorn, which succeeded in uniting the trolls against Stormwind. Though costly and close run, the human kingdom eventually emerged victorious, largely due to the intervention of the Guardian Medivh. With the entire troll army completely destroyed or rooted at the gates of Stormwind City, the jungle trolls of the south would never succeed in threatening the kingdom again. The war's conclusion also marked the beginning of nearly 2 decades of relative peace for Stormwind. Of course, to be eventually interrupted by the onset of the First War against the Orcish Horde. One calamity never just comes. It brings with it friends. And what friends, pal? Green skin, ugly ones. Indeed, we're getting ahead of ourselves right now. Let's start with this war proper before we get into that. Prelude. Years after the Gnoll War, from which the humans emerged victorious, the isolated kingdom of Stormwind continued to prosper in the southeastern area of the eastern kingdoms. Now, living in relative peace, Stormwind settlers and farmers began to expand the kingdom's borders, pushing farther in all directions. In particular, vast new territories were claimed south of the human nation, located previously, or whatever, in danger, close to the jungles of Stranglethorn Vale, the ancient homeland of the Gurubashi tribe of jungle trolls. Inevitably, skirmishes eventually began to break out between the expansionist humans and territorial trolls, though they remained for a time largely localized and small-scale. Stormwind's aging ruler, King Baratheon Rin, adopted a non-aggressive stance to these instances of violence, hoping to prevent provoking an all-out war between the two races. In time, what were once small clashes erupted into much larger disturbances. Organized troll warbands frequently began raiding Stormwindian lands, and an ever-increasing amount of blood was spilled in the conflict. In response, King Baratheon continued his policy of static defense, ordering his troops to intercept and engage any invaders before forbidding them from launching retaliatory attacks into troll lands. This decision proved bitterly controversial within the kingdom, where the king's own son, Prince Lane, strongly advocated for a more aggressive approach. His determination that Stormwind should strike back against the trolls ultimately led him into a harsh conflict with his father. While King Baratheon's efforts against the Gurubashi were effective, his armies could not stop every troll attack. At one point, a raiding party was successful in slipping past Stormwind's patrol lines, penetrating deep into the kingdom's breadbasket of Westfall. There, they cut a swath of destruction through the region, razing 3 separate towns to the ground, or razing. Ultimately, the invaders were caught up with and slain, but the barbaric and gruesome destruction they had managed to wreak shocked the kingdom. In response, the king held meetings with the nobility and his allies, although he remained adamant in his adherence to a policy of de-escalation. King Baratheon declared that while Stormwind's armies would be strengthened and bolstered, no offensive action would be taken against the trolls. The old king seems to have gotten soft. I heard getting old will do that to you. What do you think about this political and military decision? If you just defend yourself while someone is punching you, then you deserve it. Get some guns and punch back. Also, isn't this the second time Westfall was screwed over by war? It certainly won't be the last time either. Some of those times in the future is made by their own hands, in fact. Hear me out. Maybe Westfall shouldn't exist anymore. That is impossible. Stormwind and the Alliance need all the food they can get. Just move their fields to space. What? On one of those Draenei ships. You know, you might be onto something. But how would they get their most important condiment, then? Guess what? Our sponsor for today. It's all yours, Scarlet Printing Press.
Thanks. Today's sponsor is sodium chloride, the condiment that makes everything taste better. It's so good it's used to prevent veneer. You can put it on chicken, on fish, on steak, and on any type of meal. And in any type of food you will be cooking. Your husband will love it, your children will love it, you will love it, and if you are careful with how much you put, your husband won't beat you when he comes back from his mistress at midnight. It's dangerous in high consumptions. We are now responsible for any health problem that might appear.
Thank you. Now we're going back to our regular program. That's a nice sponsor we got right now. I can't say no to that. It is a pretty good one, and a famous one. Yeah, well, let's hope we can pay the bills. We all hope so, Argent Sky. Let's continue now. Prince Lane became furious at his father's decision and publicly challenged him in front of onlookers, demanding that he take firm action in response to all the blood that was spilled. Though the king was forced to rebuke his son in front of the court, the humiliation only served to galvanize the prince. Many other Stormwindians share Lane's views on the issue, including the knight Anduin Lothar and the majority of the Stormwind's army. Nevertheless, the prince understood that he could not defy his father openly. It was thus, on the suggestion of Lothar, that Lane began to formulate a plan to infiltrate deep into the heart of the Gurubashi lands, and end the troll threat once and for all. It's a secret mission. Secret mission! At about this time, a powerful figure in the form of the guardian Medivh re-entered life in the kingdom. Having been lying in a magically induced coma for years, following the emergence of his full and terrible powers, Medivh was now determined to aid his friends, Sir Lothar and Prince Lane, in order to escape his many newfound internal troubles. Lane understood that while his planned covert mission into the Jungle Trolls' territory would be small enough to evade the vast majority of both trolls and humans, the expedition needed Medivh. Medivh had long since told his two friends the secret of his true destiny as the guardian of Tirisfal, which they then now used to argue for the mage to join their mission. Medivh, still deeply troubled and confused over the recent events of his life, considered the situation at great length before hesitantly agreeing. Alone, the three set off on their journey. Making it through Stormwind's borders unnoticed, the small party utilized Medivh's magic to remain hidden as they pressed into Gurubashi lands. Their objective became the troll's leader named Joknon, who ruled from a large ziggurat in central Stranglethorn. If their leader were slain, Lane and his party were confident that the Gurubashi would descend into chaos and infighting. Unbeknownst to the humans, however, Joknon and his followers had been dabbling in the forbidden blood magics of one of their most powerful gods, the Loa spirit known as Hakar, the Soul Flayer. I told ya they do blood magic. That's an open secret at this point. Back then it wasn't just a secret. Nevertheless, when Lane and his companions finally engaged the troll leader, the ensuing battle proved brutal. Large attention was drawn to the fight atop the ziggurat as Medivh personally dueled Joknon. The troll's dark blood magics came perilously close to overwhelming Medivh, who was forced to unleash the full might of his guardian powers. The resulting spell instantly slew every troll in the area, their screams echoing throughout Stranglethorn. Shaken by their friend's display of raw power, Lane and Rotar, with Medivh in tow of course, immediately set off back to Stormwind. Though they have successfully achieved their expedition's goal, both men were shaken by the display they had witnessed, and began to harbor doubts as to the well-being of their longtime companion. But this doesn't come alone. Next, we get the Gurubashi's vengeance, because they would not take this laying down. Although no Gurubashi jungle troll survived the encounter in central Stranglethorn to testify as to the events that occurred there, the other trolls quickly pieced together who was responsible. Furious at this brazen attack, the Gurubashi forces united under the leadership of the late warlord Joknon's son, Zanon. The trolls then immediately prepared for all-out war on the humans, and began to mobilize and march in the direction of Stormwind City. Though Stormwind had been fighting with the Gurubashi for some time, they had not yet faced the trolls fully united as they were now. Used to dealing with the relatively minor raiding parties, Stormwind's southern defenses instantly crumbled under the tide of foes. The trolls' numbers proved well beyond anything the kingdom could have foreseen or imagined. Large numbers of civilians unable to escape the Gurubashi advance were slaughtered in grotesque and shocking ways upon being overtaken. Having achieved a common purpose for the first time in hundreds of years, the Gurubashi jungle trolls wasted little time on anything other than their primary objective: the utter destruction of the human's capital city of Stormwind. To this end, pushed directly towards the city itself, encountering nothing that could effectively halt their invasion. King Baratin understood the gravity of the situation, though most of the kingdom continued to reel. The king recalled all major forces to the gates of Stormwind City itself, to face the attackers in a pitched battle if necessary. At this time, Prince Lane and his two friends informed the king of what had transpired in Stranglethorn. Though upset, King Baratin did not see fit to punish the three men, given the already dire circumstances. Long before the Gurubashi army arrived outside Stormwind's walls in terrifying numbers. Before long, maybe the king was right though, after all. Nah, he wasn't. What those three bozos did was wrong. Wait, what do you mean? I ain't the war master for nothing, pal. What they did was an assassination gone wrong. Should they have fought back normally, the trolls would have not united. Oh, that's an interesting way to look at things. That's why I'm the military expert on this show and you are the political one. Please don't call me that. The producer said that. After or during his, bender that made him think that he was the Tooth Fairy and danced naked in front of traffic. During. My point taken. With that out of the way, let's continue. Zanon had since learned of many of the dark magics of his father, and used these powers to create powerful new mutated soldiers. These beasts scaled the city walls with ease, using their unholy strength to rip apart fortification and defender alike. As the trolls continued to clash with the soldiers of Stormwind, the death toll began to rise rapidly. Realizing that the current situation was unwinnable, King Baratin chose to mount a desperate attack with his own elite guard directly into the heart of enemy lines, bravely seeking to slay Zanon himself. Stormwind's king was still desperately outnumbered. Baratin Rin came close to his goal, but was ultimately killed on the field of battle. Lane Rin, now king, no longer prince, was overcome with guilt at his father's death, lamenting his actions that began the conflict originally. Despite his grief, the former prince refused to give in to despair. Though Stormwind's defenses were on the verge of collapse, Lane would not give up on those that now looked to him for leadership. He pleaded with Medivh to once more unleash the full might of his powers to turn the tide of battle, to which the mage ultimately agreed. From atop the battlements of Stormwind, Medivh the Guardian once more harnessed the full might of his abilities. With unmatched fire, frost, and arcane magics, the mage laid waste to the troll forces. Innumerable Gurubashis were frozen, incinerated, or simply ripped apart by the unbridled powers at work. The trolls' deaths were particularly torturous, a fully intended action on Medivh's part. When Medivh had finally finished, Stormwind City and its defenders still stood unscathed, though the same could not be said for the Gurubashi. Almost the entire troll army had been annihilated in the maelstrom of raw power, including their leader, Warlord Zanon, with only a small handful fleeing alive. The aftermath. In the wake of the destruction, the citizens of Stormwind began to bury the dead and repair the damage to their city. They rejoiced for their salvation at the hands of Medivh, who was now regarded as one of the kingdom's greatest protectors, and happily accepted King Lane as their new ruler. Anduin Lothar too benefited from the recent events, being raised to one of the highest commands in the military. The general populace never became aware of the secret expedition into the heart of Stranglethorn that sparked the war, or the direct involvement of their new king. However, the consequences of their actions weighed heavily upon Lane, Lothar, and Medivh, having led to the deaths of hundreds. His unrestricted use of his full and terrible powers deeply troubled Medivh, who now doubted whether he possessed the will required to temper such abilities. The events of the Gurubashi War were what ultimately convinced the Guardian to seek out answers to the many questions that had been plaguing his mind. Shortly afterward, he traveled to the ancient tower of Karazhan at the behest of a mysterious woman in his dreams. There, Medivh would ultimately uncover his destiny and his guardian birthright, which would alter the course of Azeroth's history forever. Sometime later, the demon lord Sargeras, residing within Medivh, would utilize the example set by the Gurubashi War to convince the Guardian of Azeroth's pettiness. The flimsy and arbitrary response for the war between humans and jungle trolls was placed in stark contrast to the powerful unity of the races of Azeroth during the War of the Ancients, millennia before. Costly victory, this one. And now I realize we didn't do a bunch of ancient wars before starting this. We'll get to those once we make the money for, to pose the bill of the producer. I liked it. They're both good and bad strategies. It's prettier than what follows next. Indeed it is. But this is the end of this show. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next one.